Okay, Jeff, we need to get the pad on the backing plate. You're going to need that spur. So if you'd put the pad on the backing plate for me. Okay, secure that Velcro.
Okay.
Now turn your buffer on. Whoa, there's a problem here. That thing, even if it isn't way off center, even if it's a little off center, turn your buffer on and just let it run on the floor. Let's lock it. See the vibration in your tool? You're the one that has to handle this buffer all day. You can work hard if you want to, or let's think about making it easier for you.
Okay.
So let's turn that off. Take the backing plate loose from the pad. Put this in there. Let's center that thing on that backing plate. Okay. Now let's turn your buffer on. A lot less physical energy. You're also going to reduce your swirl marks. Okay, let's grab your pad spur and let's clean that pad. So there's your buffer. Turn your RPMs down to a low speed, 1,000. Let's start you off at 1,000.
Okay.
Okay? Now before you mount this backing plate to the pad, we need to think about centering this backing plate. You don't want it vibrating on you during your buff. Okay. So turn your buffer over and make sure that the hole is cleaned out. That way you go in flat. We're going to drop the tube in, let the pad slide down, secure the Velcro, and now you're centered. Turn that on and see if it's got any vibration. Is that smooth?
Pretty smooth.
Okay, that's the first thing you need to remember as you begin to buff, okay? So put your hand on the buffer and turn the buffer on and move the buffer left and right. Keep that pad perfectly flat, okay? Now move it straight up and down, keeping the pad perfectly flat, okay? Now stop your pad, turn the buffer on. Now I don't want you to move your hand away from the buffer, but I want you to release the buffer. And if you'll notice, when you push down on the handle very lightly, the buffer goes to your right. You pick up on the handle, it goes to the left. So now the buffer's doing the work and you're not putting the physical energy into it. Now you can also make the buffer go straight up and straight down using that same technique. Can you make it go straight up? Yeah, it's a little tricky, isn't it? But as you're learning to buff, you'll pick these techniques up. But the idea is learn how to buff so that it's easier and not so physical, pushing and pulling that buffer. Gotcha. Okay, so grab your buffer, both hands, and just think about that. Tilt up is left, push down is right, and let it go back and forth across that paint. Keeping the pad flat. I don't want that much flex. There you go. Nice and flat. It's a very minute movement. Okay? Now bring your buffer over here and stop it right on this line. See the edge of the backing plate? Yes. Think of that as an invisible line that matches up with the line, the body line. So when that backing plate crosses a body line, that's where you burn paint. So never allow that backing plate to cross the body line and you won't burn paint.
Okay.
Okay? So turn your buffer on and run that up and down that edge. Now at this point during your buff, it's okay to buff on the edge of the buffing pad while you buff an edge. That's the only time you buff on the edge of the pad. Then you come back nice and flat and follow up flat. And it's okay again to tilt that pad up a little bit. There you go. You can bring it over. You can bring it over. There you go. Now you can buff the edge and not burn the paint. Always flatten the pad out then and give it a nice flat to remove any swirl from buffing on edge. Okay? Now bring the buffer over to this side of the edge. So now we've buffed this side of the painted panel. Now we need to buff this little curvature down in here. Okay. The same rule applies. It's okay to tilt your buffer on edge, but do not allow the backing plate to cross the body line and you won't burn paint. So just run that up and down that body line for me. Okay? And now go flat. You will not burn paint if you remember these rules. Now, are you controlling the buffer or is the buffer controlling you? That's the question. Is it smooth?
Smooth.
Now you have an edge here, an edge here, and an edge here. You've got 3 critical points here where you could burn paint. So what we have to do is finesse the buffer. Okay, now bring your buffer down here, slight tilt, bring it up here. Okay, now stop. Stop the buffer. Your buffer's rotating in clockwise motion. So what I want you to do is swing the buffer to this corner. That way the clockwise comes off the edge and you're not catching on this side. Okay, so the tilt is come off the edge this side and you don't catch the edge on this side, and that way you don't burn. So bring the buffer up and remember that turn, and that way you don't burn paint. Very good. Start your buffer, float it up, and just kind of feather that edge together. Don't cross either of those body lines. Great. Now go back down your... Beautiful, beautiful. So if you remember those basics, you won't burn paint and you won't swirl paint, and you're going to have control of the buffer. When you're having to push the buffer and pull that buffer, it's working you to death.
Right.
Okay? So this simplifies it. Now another rule, and it is a law, if you will. If you take a look at the paint where we've been buffing with a dry pad, see the amount of swirl marks in the hood?
Right.
That is dead wrong. Never buff dry. You should always buff paint with product under your pad. Case in point, when you buff dry, you swirl paint. Now you have to fix it. Okay? So the next thing we need to learn is how not to buff dry. We're going to learn how to spread product across this hood without slinging it. I don't want you to wear it home. I don't want to wear it home. I don't want to clean it up off the rest of the vehicle. Sure. So let's move back over to where we were. So we're going to take a polish. We're going to put a straight line of product across the hood. Now what I'd like for you to do is take your buffer and set it on the far right hand side away from the product. There you go. And I want you to tilt the pad up just high enough to clear the height of the polish. Gotcha. And go nice and slow through this. Line your handle up with the product. Slight tilt and go very, very slow through that product. Now flat. There you go. No product sling, less product to clean up. Keep that pad flat. I don't want to see that edge flexing. Nice and flat. Remember the tilt. Now, to keep your products working wetter for a longer period of time, reducing swirls, I'm going to mist some Lubrishine on the surface and just continue buffing. Now drop it down, drop the pad down. Here's what I want you to do. Follow me. Think of a big S pattern. Here's a big S. Stop. Can you see the big S pattern?
Yes.
Okay. The center of your pad, the center of this pad is a deeper cut than the edges of the pad. So what I want to do is reduce this cut into a finer grouping. So instead of a big S, I want you to buff in a small S. And if you would spread that for me, I'll show you the small S pattern. Flat. Keep that pad flat. Okay? Here's a small S. Get in the habit of going left to right. Drop the buffer down. Left to right. Drop the buffer down. Left to right. Okay, back to the top. Left to right. Left to right. Left to right. Beautiful. So we're going to clean up our product. Do not buff the product till it's dry and dusty. Okay. Dust creates swirl marks. Swirl marks can be difficult to remove from the paint. You already heard about that. Swirls, swirls, swirls. Think about a brand new Rolls Royce coming in. Would you wipe the dust off that black car?
Not at all.
Why would you not do that?
Right. Well, because it creates swirls.
Well, it creates scratches, doesn't it? If I rub it off, I get scratches. Now, if I wipe that dust off like this, what do we call those scratches?
Swirls.
Swirls. Same thing with your pad. Sure. So don't buff your products till they're dry and dusty. Now, if you look here where we have learned how to spread our polish, buff flat, buff wet, your swirl marks are virtually gone, where before we had a major rash of swirl marks. Remember those basics, and you'll be able to handle that buffer just fine, okay? Any questions for me? All right, let's get back to work on the sandpaper scratches and the compacts.